The morning my mother-in-law showed up at my door with a stranger in a suit, I already had my attorney on speed dial. She stood there on my porch, the woman who had never once called me by my first name in 11 years of marriage, with a manila envelope pressed against her chest, and a smile I had only ever seen on her face when she thought she was winning something. The man beside her was tall, silver-haired, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive enough to make a point. He wasn't there for pleasantries. Neither was she. "Claire," my mother-in-law said, and already the way she said my name told me everything. Not sweetheart, not honey, the way she used to call me when my husband Daniel was still alive and she needed something from me. Just Claire. Flat. Final. Like a door closing. "We need to talk about the house." I stepped aside without a word and let my own attorney walk in first. The look on her face when she saw Rebecca standing in my entryway, calm, arms folded, a stack of documents already on the kitchen table, was something I had been waiting 11 months to see. The color didn't drain from her face all at once. It left slowly, like water pulling back before a wave. "What is this?" she asked. Rebecca didn't answer right away. She simply gestured toward the table. That moment, the silence, the papers, the way my mother-in-law's silver-haired lawyer suddenly looked a great deal less certain of himself was the moment I stopped being afraid. But I need to tell you how I got there. Because 6 months earlier, I was sitting on the floor of Daniel's closet at 2 in the morning, holding one of his flannel shirts to my face, trying to remember what it felt like when the worst thing that had ever happened to me hadn't happened yet. Daniel died on a Tuesday in November. A cerebral aneurysm, the doctors said. Fast. He would not have felt pain. I was supposed to find comfort in that, and sometimes, at 3 in the morning when the house felt like it was breathing around me, I almost did. We had been married for 11 years. We had a daughter, Lily, who was 9 years old and still slept with the nightlight on. We had a home in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, a house Daniel and I had bought together the year after Lily was born. Painted ourselves over 2 long weekends, argued about the color of the kitchen cabinets, and finally agreed on a soft gray that made the whole room feel like Sunday morning. It was our home. It had always been our home. I want you to understand that before I tell you what came next, because what came next has a way of making everything feel transactional. And this was never, not for a single day of my marriage, transactional. My mother-in-law, Patricia, had always been a complicated presence in our lives. She was the kind of woman who gave gifts with strings attached and called it generosity. She had opinions about how I kept the house, how I raised Lily, how I spent money, how I wore my hair. Daniel loved her the way good sons love difficult mothers, with patience and a certain careful distance. He knew who she was. He had spent 38 years learning her edges. After Daniel died, Patricia called me every day for the first 2 weeks. I thought it was grief. I thought we were both drowning in the same water and reaching for the same rope. I cooked for her. I drove her to the funeral arrangements. I sat beside her in the front pew and held her hand and let her lean on me when her knees went soft. I thought we were family. I found out what she actually thought we were on a gray morning in March. 4 months after Daniel's funeral. When she arrived at my door with her youngest son, my brother-in-law Marcus, and told me, very calmly, that Daniel had updated his will 3 weeks before he died. I remember that I was holding a cup of coffee. I remember that Lily's backpack was still by the door because I hadn't taken her to school yet. I remember that the coffee went cold in my hand while Patricia talked, because I couldn't make myself put it down or drink it or do anything except stand there and listen to her explain to me that according to this new will, the house, our house, Lily's home, was to be transferred to the family estate, held in trust by Patricia and Marcus, and that I would be entitled to remain as a tenant for up to 18 months while I arranged alternative housing. Arranged alternative housing. Those were the words she used. I looked at her. I looked at Marcus, who was examining something on his phone and wouldn't meet my eyes. And then I said, very quietly, that I needed her to leave. I don't remember much about the hours after that. I know I took Lily to school. I know I sat in the parking lot afterward for a long time without driving anywhere. I know that when I finally got home I called my sister in Pittsburgh and cried so hard I couldn't finish a sentence, and she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours while I tried to make sense of something that made no sense at all. Here is what I knew about Daniel in the last weeks of his life. He had been tired. The kind of tired that settles into a person's eyes and doesn't lift. We had thought it was stress. He had been managing a difficult transition at work, and he was the kind of man who carried things quietly, without complaint. He had occasional headaches. He took aspirin and didn't mention them much. 3 days before he died, he told me he loved me at breakfast in a way that made me look up from the stove, because it was the kind of thing you say when you mean it as a complete sentence and not just as punctuation at the end of leaving the room. I did not know, because I was not told, that Daniel had also visited an urgent care clinic twice in those final weeks. I did not know that he had complained of visual disturbances, of pressure behind his eyes, of a fatigue that sleep wasn't touching. I did not know any of this until later, when I started looking. And what I found when I started looking changed everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. After Patricia and Marcus left that morning in March, I did 3 things. First, I called my sister back and told her what had happened. Second, I called the estate attorney who had handled Daniel's original will, the one he and I had drafted together 2 years after Lily was born. The one that left everything to me in trust for our daughter. And third, I sat down at my kitchen table with the copy of the new will Patricia had handed me, and I read every single word. It was dated 3 weeks before Daniel died. It bore what appeared to be his signature. It had been notarized by someone I had never heard of. It left the house, 2 investment accounts, and a significant portion of Daniel's savings to a family trust administered jointly by Patricia and Marcus. It left me what was described as a reasonable transitional allowance and use of the vehicle. I read it twice. Then I put it down on the table and looked out the window at the backyard where Lily's swing set still had the pink ribbons on it from her last birthday party, and I made a decision. I was not going to let this happen. I found Rebecca through my estate attorney, who told me she was the best family litigation attorney in the county and that if anyone could untangle something like this, it was her. I remember my first meeting with her a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Patricia's visit. Rebecca was direct in the way that competent people are direct, without cruelty. Without softening things to the point where the truth gets lost. She read the will. She read Daniel's original documents. She asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. And then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Tell me about the last month of Daniel's life. Everything you remember." So I did. I told her about the tiredness and the headaches. I told her about the urgent care visits I had found out about afterward, through a billing statement that arrived addressed to Daniel 2 weeks after his funeral. I told her about the medication he had been given, a blood pressure drug that, as I had since learned after too many late nights searching online, carried known side effects that included cognitive impairment and, in some cases, impaired decision-making capacity. Rebecca wrote everything down without looking up. "Did Daniel ever mention changing his will?" she asked. "No," I said. "Never. The last time we talked about it, about 2 years ago, he said he wanted to add a college provision for Lily. That was the only thing he wanted to change. We just hadn't gotten around to scheduling it yet." Rebecca nodded slowly. "The notary on this document," she said. "Do you recognize the name?" I didn't. But Patricia did. As it turned out, when Rebecca's investigators started pulling threads, the notary was a woman who had worked for Marcus's company for 6 years. She notarized real estate documents for his business regularly. She and Marcus had exchanged 47 text messages in the 2 weeks surrounding the date on Daniel's will. That was the first thread. The second thread was the signature itself. Rebecca had sent the document to a forensic handwriting analyst, a quiet, methodical man in his 60s who had testified in court more than 200 times. He compared the signature on the new will against 6 other documents bearing Daniel's handwriting from the same period. A letter he had written to his college roommate, and the greeting card he had tucked inside the flowers he brought me on our anniversary 2 months before he died. The analyst's conclusion was careful and specific. He identified 7 points of divergence between the signature on the new will and Daniel's authenticated handwriting. He used terms like tremor inconsistency and pressure deviation and uncharacteristic pen lift. In plain English, it meant that the signature on that will did not match the way Daniel wrote his own name. It meant someone else had signed it. I want to tell you that when Rebecca called me with those findings, I felt triumphant. I want to tell you that I put down the phone and felt the ground solidify under me and breathed easy for the first time in months. But the truth is that what I felt was something much more complicated and much harder to sit with. Because the alternative to Daniel signing that document himself was that someone in his family, someone who had stood beside me at his funeral, who had held my hand in that church, had forged his signature. Had done it while he was sick, while he was tired, while he was heading toward a death none of us knew was coming. Had done it and then handed me a copy with a calm smile on their face and told me to arrange alternative housing. I sat with that for a long time. Lily asked me one evening, around this time, why I stayed up so late. She had padded out to the kitchen in her socks to get a glass of water, and found me at the table with papers spread in front of me and a cold cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink. I told her I was working on something important. She climbed into the chair beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder the way she had done since she was small, and she said, "Is it about our house?" I looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" "Grandma Patricia told me we might have to move," she said. Completely matter of fact. The way children report things they don't fully understand but have absorbed completely. She said Daddy wanted us to move somewhere smaller. I put my arm around my daughter and told her that we were not going anywhere. I told her that this was her home and her father had built it with us, and it was going to stay ours. I told her that with more certainty than I had felt in months, because sitting there with her warm and real against my side, I realized that whatever fear I had been carrying around in my chest needed to leave. There was no room for it anymore. That was the night everything shifted. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca and I built our case the way you build something that has to hold weight carefully, methodically, with attention to every joint. We had the handwriting analysis. We had the connection between the notary and Marcus. We had Daniel's medical records, which Rebecca obtained through proper legal channels, documenting his medications and the specific cognitive effects associated with his dosage in the final weeks of his life. And then we found the third thing. I had been going through a box of Daniel's belongings that I hadn't been able to open since he died, a box from his home office, full of folders and notebooks and the general accumulation of a careful person's working life. I had been avoiding it for months, but one evening in late April, with Lily at her grandmother's for the weekend, my mother, not Patricia, I sat down on the floor of the office and opened it. Near the bottom, inside a manila folder labeled with nothing but a date from 2 years ago, I found an envelope. Inside the envelope was a document I had never seen before. It was a letter of instruction, handwritten by Daniel in his own unmistakable script, the same confident, left-leaning handwriting I had spent 11 years watching fill birthday cards and grocery lists and the margins of the books he read. The letter was addressed to me. It was dated 2 years before he died. In it, Daniel wrote that he had become aware of certain pressures from members of his family regarding his estate. He wrote that he wanted to make his intentions absolutely clear in a form that could not be altered or challenged. He wrote that our house, our accounts, and everything we had built together were meant for me and for Lily, without condition or qualification. He wrote that if anything ever happened to him, he trusted me to protect what we had made. And at the bottom, he wrote, "If you're reading this because something has gone wrong, I'm sorry, I'm not there to fix it myself. You always were the stronger one. I just never told you enough." I sat on that floor for a very long time. When I brought the letter to Rebecca, she went quiet in a way that told me it mattered. She sent it to the handwriting analyst. His authentication came back within the week. Unambiguous match to Daniel's known handwriting, consistent with the period indicated by the date. The letter wasn't a legal document in the formal sense, but it was evidence. It was Daniel's voice, clear and present, saying exactly what he had intended. And combined with everything else we had built, it was, Rebecca told me, more than enough. Patricia filed an official claim on the property in late April, following through on the threat the new will represented. That was when I finally told my sister everything: the forged signature, the notary, Marcus's involvement, the letter. She drove from Pittsburgh that Friday and spent the weekend with me and Lily. And that somewhere in the middle of the night I laughed at something she said and realized it was the first time I had laughed in months. I was ready. The morning Patricia arrived with her silver-haired attorney to formally present their claim. I had been awake since 5. I had made coffee. I had made Lily's lunch and walked her to the end of the driveway to meet the school bus. I had stood in the kitchen afterward and looked at the soft gray walls and the pictures of Lily at every age and the photo of Daniel and me at the coast on our 5th anniversary. And I had said out loud, to nobody, that this was our home and it was going to stay that way. Rebecca had arrived at 8:30. We went over everything one final time. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have done this enough times to know what the outcome is before it arrives. When Patricia walked in and saw Rebecca standing at the kitchen table with the documents in front of her, she stopped mid-sentence. Her attorney's eyes moved to the papers. And I watched something shift in his expression, a subtle recalibration. A professional adjustment to new information. "What is this?" Patricia asked. Rebecca introduced herself. She explained, in precise and unhurried terms, what we had found. The handwriting analysis. The notary's documented relationship with Marcus. Daniel's medical records. And finally, the letter. She read the relevant section of the letter aloud. Daniel's words in that kitchen, in Rebecca's steady voice. Patricia sat down. She didn't ask to sit, she simply lowered herself into the nearest chair as if her legs had decided something before she did. Her attorney leaned down and spoke quietly in her ear. She shook her head once, slowly. Marcus, who had come with them and was standing in the hallway, left without saying a word. I did not say anything to Patricia for a long time. I watched her sit with what she had done. And I tried to find something to feel that wasn't grief. Because underneath the anger, underneath the long months of fear and paperwork and late nights, the thing that hurt most was not the house. It was that Daniel had been right to write that letter. He had known, even then, what his family was capable of. And he had loved them anyway. He had loved them and protected us anyway, as well as he knew how, before he ran out of time. He knew, I finally said. He told me. He left me everything I needed. You just assumed I wouldn't look. Patricia didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The legal process that followed took several months, and I will not pretend it was simple. Patricia and Marcus did not concede immediately. There was a formal challenge, a hearing, a series of depositions during which, I was told, the notary was less than composed when asked about her text messages with Marcus. There was a moment, 2/3 of the way through, when Patricia's attorney made a motion that Rebecca quietly and methodically dismantled over the course of a single afternoon, after which her own attorney advised her to stop. The court ruled in my favor in September. The house remained in my name. The fraudulent will was invalidated. The investment accounts were unfrozen. Daniel's actual intentions, as documented in both his original will and his handwritten letter, were honored. I was standing in the backyard when Rebecca called to tell me. Lily was on the swing set, the pink ribbons still on the handles, kicking her feet up toward the sky. The leaves were just starting to turn. The air had that particular smell of early fall that I will always associate now with the moment I let myself believe, completely, that we were going to be all right. I told Lily that evening at dinner. I told her that everything was settled, that this was our home and it was going to stay that way, just like I had promised her. She nodded like it was information she had already filed away. Because she is 9 and practical and had decided to trust me months ago. And then she asked if we could get a dog. I said yes. Here is what I want you to know. If you have made it this far with me, the months between that March morning when Patricia stood on my porch and the September afternoon when Rebecca called me, those months were the hardest I have ever lived through. Not because of the legal process, though that was exhausting. Not even because of the grief, though that continued in the way grief does, in waves, at unexpected moments. What made it hardest was the specific loneliness of fighting for something that should never have been in question. Of having to prove that your home is your home. Of having to assemble evidence that your husband loved you. But I also want you to know that Daniel knew me. He knew that if something happened to him, I would not fold quietly. He knew that I would sit on the floor of his office in the middle of the night and go through every folder in every box until I found what I was looking for. He knew that I was the stronger one, even when I didn't feel it. He left me what I needed. I just had to be willing to go looking. The dog's name is Biscuit. She is a 7-month-old beagle mix who chews shoes and sleeps at the foot of Lily's bed and has claimed the corner of the couch by the window as her permanent residence. Daniel would have loved her immediately and pretended to be annoyed by her for approximately 48 hours before letting her sleep on his feet. The house still has the soft gray kitchen. The swing set still has the pink ribbons. And on the shelf in the hallway, next to a photo of Daniel and Lily taken the summer before he died, there is a small framed card with a line from his letter on it. You always were the stronger one. I just never told you enough. I look at it every morning. Some days it makes me cry. Most days, it makes me stand up a little straighter and walk into whatever the day has for me. This is our home. It always was. And now everyone knows it.